Crossovers are the most desired bikes par excellence right now, but they have one major problem. They're tall bikes, just like this Versys 1000 SE, and also very heavy. But in this video, I want to explain how you too can manage such a tall and heavy bike relatively easily, simply by being careful to follow these 5 tips. First thing to know, in stationary maneuvers, be careful not to lose your balance, because with such a big, tall and heavy bike, the risk is truly high. So when you get in the saddle, be careful not to overbalance too much, because the bike is at extreme risk in this case. If you let it lean a bit too much, it's still a significant mass. On the Versys 1000 SE, it's 257 kilos in running order, so up to a point, even if you're very strong, you can hold it. After that, if you lose your balance, it's really all over. And along the same lines, if you need to maneuver in tight spaces, avoid pushing it like this, because you might not make it, you'll get tired, and you undeniably risk dropping it. Trust me, it can happen. So for stationary maneuvers, my advice is always to get off the bike and move it by hand, maybe by grabbing it, for example, in this case by the passenger handles, or simply by the handlebars, to have better control of the vehicle and even lean it against us to make things easier. Another important difference between a tall and heavy bike like this Versys 1000 SE and other bikes is to carefully consider maneuvers during the parking phases. You never ever, and I repeat never, want to park a bike like this with this size on a slope with the nose facing downhill. This is because when you have to leave the parking spot, if it's a dead end, like there's a wall and you're on a slope, pulling it back is truly an incredible effort. You probably won't manage it alone, even by getting off the bike. So the advice in these cases, especially if there's no one who can help you pull the bike back, and if maybe your bike doesn't have reverse gear, because some of these heavy bikes do have reverse, the advice is to always park with the slope. So the low part, the descent, matches the rear wheel with the front wheel facing uphill. That way you'll be able to exit the parking spot simply by giving it gas. Typical situation, we arrive, there's a parking spot on a slight downhill slope. We stop, we don't go straight in, we turn around and maneuver in reverse. Enjoying the descent in that case, since we can still manage it with the brakes, and then when exiting we'll have the throttle available to leave the parking spot with ease. Another fundamental and often overlooked aspect, even on bikes so easy to adjust the suspension. Specifically, this Versys 1000 SE, being the SE version, also has suspension that follows the engine maps. In fact, they're electronically adjusted, even the preload. Just press a button and you change the bike's use for 1 person, 2 people, or 2 people and luggage. So we also have a way to manage the suspension settings relatively quickly. But if you don't have a bike with electronic suspension, the point is the same. Have it tuned for your weight by a specialist or even an expert friend, better than nothing, but do this procedure because only then will the bike help you. If your suspension is too stiff or the preload is wrong for your weight, it will totally change the bike's setup. And on a bike like this, which is already tall and demanding due to its weight anyway, having the wrong suspension tuning certainly doesn't help and actually makes things worse. On this Versys 1000 SE, I just need to change the engine maps to adjust the suspension control. For example, now in sport mode, the hydraulic behavior will be much stiffer, so the suspension will be firmer. Switching back to road or maybe rain mode, the suspension behavior will be softer and more comfortable. If I want to adjust the preload instead, I have the preload button here, I hold it down, and this way, you might even hear it, the bike is also adjusting the seat height, which is important for a bike that's already hard to handle. The higher the preload, the more the bike's tail will rise, obviously because the bike expects a passenger and luggage to be installed, so the setup remains balanced. But if you set it with minimum preload, the seat obviously drops a bit, just enough to always maintain that same neutral setup. This isn't the way to gain inches on the seat, but it is the way to have the right setup based on the riding conditions. 4th tip, understand the importance of the center of gravity. You've heard about a bike's center of gravity 1,000 times, but it's this very element that can make a bike like the Versys 1000 SE easier to handle than a bike that might weigh 60 kilos less but has a higher center of gravity. What is the center of gravity? It's the point, as you probably studied in school, where the weight of an object is concentrated, a motorcycle in this case. In the case of the Versys 1000 SE, for example, the weight is shifted downwards here in the engine area. Also because the tank isn't among the tallest. For instance, maxi enduro bikes usually have very high tanks, and so the tank, if full, has fuel and fuel has weight, so this shifts the bike's center of gravity upwards. In this case, however, the engine is very low slung, the tank isn't very high, and so the center of gravity is relatively low. Even the seat of the Versys 1000 isn't that high, and this makes it a bike with a low center of gravity. This means that even for me, being 1.77 m and weighing 71 or 72 kilos, this is a bike to be careful with, but not that difficult to handle with ease. There are other bikes that might weigh 200 kilos. I'll name one, the Tenere 700, so we're talking about 60 kilos less than the Versys, but it has a very high seat, making it hard to touch the ground. And above all, the center of gravity is much higher than the Versys 1000 SE. and this often makes the Tenere harder to handle than a bike like the Versys 1000. Then it's clear maybe in tight maneuvers a bike like this is still more demanding precisely because the weight is greater. You can move the Tenere more easily even when you're off the saddle. But it's important to understand that the spec sheet, the weight you read for a specific bike, doesn't necessarily tell you if that bike will be hard to handle in real-world use. That said, seat height still remains a fairly objective factor, so if a bike's seat happens to be just a bit too high for your height, there really is not much you can do about it, honestly. Sure, you could try lowering the suspension or modify the seat by shaving it down, setting it lower if it's adjustable, or even picking a low seat option if the accessory catalog offers one. But at some point, if you're 1.60 m, handling a bike like this or a Tenere 700 will always be a challenge. No seat or suspension setting will change that. Some bikes are just built tall and others are built low. If you're on the shorter side, cruiser bikes won't be a problem to handle, for example, whereas a maxi enduro might be. So there's an objective physical factor to keep in mind there. It's better to choose a slightly lower bike, even if it's not your first choice, so you can handle it confidently, rather than your dream bike that you can't safely manage due to its size, leading to drops or just a lack of peace of mind while riding. And it's not just about height, but also about physical strength. You might have a tall bike that's light enough for you to handle, or you could have a low cruiser, easy to manage height-wise, but it's so heavy that you can't handle it with your own strength, especially when parking. So it's not always a given that your dream bike will be the right one for everyday use. That's all for this video. Let me know if these 5 tips and tricks for handling a tall, heavy bike were helpful, and tell me what you ride or plan to ride in the future. With these bikes, you have to be a bit more careful, but the riding techniques are ultimately the same. Clearly, weight and height play a key role, especially when choosing a bike, as we've seen. But once you've chosen a bike that's a bit beyond your physical limits, with the right technique and strategy, you can handle it just like any other bike. So let me know what you ride, and I'll see you very soon, right here on the channel in the next video.